Mara saw the listing late at night while sitting on her small bed in a rented room. The fan above her moved slowly and pushed warm air around the space. Her phone screen glowed in the dark as she scrolled through pages she normally avoided. She had learned not to dream too much about houses. Houses were for people with savings and families and steady lives. Still, her fingers stopped when she saw the picture of a dark opening in stone. The price was so low that she thought it was a mistake. $250 felt unreal, like a number missing a few zeros. She read the title again and felt her chest tighten with curiosity. The description was short and careless, as if the seller wanted to be done with it quickly. It said the house was carved into a hillside near an old desert town. It mentioned no electricity, no water, and no guarantee of safety. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Sold as is was written twice. Buyer responsible for clearing remaining items was written once at the end. Mara read that line many times. It made her imagine objects left behind, things someone once needed. She told herself it did not matter. She had nothing to lose except another year of rent. Mara was 32 years old and felt older than that most days. She worked 2 jobs that never rested at the same time. At night she answered calls for a company that did not care who she was. In the early mornings she cleaned offices before workers arrived. Her sleep came in short pieces, and her meals were simple and rushed. She had no partner and no children, only a few friends who were always busy. She did not complain because complaining never changed anything. When she thought about the cave house, she felt something close to hope, and that scared her more than fear ever did. She contacted the seller and received a reply within minutes. The message was short and direct, giving her a meeting place and time. No questions were asked about her plans or her background. That made her uneasy, but it also made the decision easier. 2 days later, she borrowed a friend's old car and packed it with water, food, and a sleeping bag. The drive was long and quiet. The road stretched across dry land where trees were rare and buildings were scattered. Her phone signal faded early, and the silence grew thicker with every mile. The town appeared suddenly, like it had been placed there by accident. A single diner stood near the road, its sign faded by years of sun. There was a small post office and a few houses that looked tired and empty. The seller waited in the diner parking lot, leaning against a truck with peeling paint. He was thin, with lines on his face that spoke of long days outside. His eyes did not meet hers for long. He handed her the papers and pointed toward the hills. His voice was calm but distant, like he was repeating something he had said many times before. Mara asked him who lived there before. The question slipped out before she could stop it. The man paused, then shrugged slightly. He said the person wanted to be left alone. He said the town stopped asking questions a long time ago. His tone carried no warmth or humor. When she pressed for more, he shook his head and said it was better not to dig into old stories. The way he said it made her feel like she had crossed an invisible line. She signed the papers with a steady hand and handed over the cash. The cave house was a short walk from where they parked. It blended into the hillside so well that it was easy to miss. The entrance was smooth and shaped with care, not broken or rough. Cool air flowed from inside, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. When Mara stepped in, her eyes needed time to adjust. The light softened as it moved along curved stone walls. The space felt quiet but not empty. It felt like it remembered something. Inside, the cave opened into a main area where the floor was worn smooth. A narrow sleeping space was carved deeper inside, along with small shelves built directly into the stone. There were dark marks where lanterns once hung and shallow grooves where hands had brushed past the wall for years. Nothing felt random. Whoever lived here had planned each part with intention. Mara felt a strange sense of respect for a person she had never met. She imagined long nights spent listening to wind and silence. When the seller left, the sound of his truck faded quickly, and the quiet returned stronger than before. Mara stood alone at the entrance and felt the weight of the place settle around her. She told herself she owned something now, even if it was simple and hidden. That thought gave her strength. She laid out her sleeping bag near the entrance that night and watched the stars through the opening. The cave stayed cool and steady, like it was guarding her rest. The next morning, she began cleaning. She moved slowly and carefully, brushing dust from shelves and sweeping the floor. Broken crates were stacked near the entrance, and old containers were set aside. Most of the space had been cleared long ago, but some things remained. Near the back wall, she noticed a stone slab that looked different from the others. It was smoother and slightly loose. When she pushed it aside, she found a small wooden chest resting behind it. The chest was old but well kept. It opened easily, as if it had been waiting. Inside were notebooks wrapped in cloth. The pages were filled with neat writing, each entry dated and careful. Mara sat on the stone floor and began to read. The words spoke of choosing the cave as a place of peace, not escape. They described watching the land, learning its patterns, and living quietly by design. The writer believed that staying unnoticed was a form of safety. As she read deeper, the tone shifted slightly. The entries mentioned strange changes in the town and unfamiliar faces passing through. The writer described feeling watched at times, then dismissed the feeling as caution. The final entry ended without warning. The sentence stopped halfway through a thought. There was no explanation, no farewell. The date written at the top matched a year Mara remembered from an old article she once read about someone who vanished from this area. Mara closed the notebook and looked around the cave again. The walls felt closer now, and the silence felt heavier. She realized she had not just bought a place to live. She had stepped into the unfinished life of someone who chose this cave for a reason. Standing there, she understood that her life had already changed, even if she did not yet know how. Mara did not leave the cave that day. She sat near the back wall with the notebooks spread beside her, and let the quiet settle again. The words stayed in her mind even when she stopped reading. They felt calm but alert, like someone always listening. She noticed how the writer described ordinary things with care: the sound of wind, the movement of light, the rhythm of days. It did not feel like a person running away. It felt like a person preparing. That thought made Mara uneasy, because preparation meant expectation. She spent the afternoon organizing the notebooks by date. There were many years of writing, more than she first realized. Some entries were short and practical, about storing water or repairing stone. Others were longer and thoughtful, almost gentle in tone. The writer spoke of the town from a distance, watching it change slowly. New people arrived, old ones left, and questions were asked less often. The writer believed that quiet living protected truth. Mara wondered what truth needed that kind of protection. As evening came, Mara stepped outside to cook a simple meal. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in soft colors. From where she stood, she could see the town far away, small and still. She imagined the previous resident standing in the same place years ago, watching the same sky. The idea made the space feel shared, not empty. For the first time since arriving, she felt a strange responsibility, like she was holding something that mattered. That night, sleep did not come easily. The cave stayed silent, but her thoughts were loud. She kept thinking about the final unfinished sentence. It felt wrong to leave it unanswered. In the early morning, she made a decision. She would go into town and learn more. Not to chase rumors, but to understand the place she now belonged to. She packed water and notebooks into her bag and locked the cave entrance as best she could. The diner was quiet when she arrived. A few older locals sat at tables, speaking softly. Mara ordered coffee and waited, listening more than talking. When she mentioned the cave house, the room shifted slightly. No one reacted strongly, but eyes lifted and then looked away. An older woman behind the counter asked how long Mara planned to stay. Her voice was gentle but careful. Mara said she had just arrived and hoped to make a life there. Later, a man named Luis approached her table. He had lived in the town his whole life and spoke slowly, choosing his words. He said people remembered the cave resident, though few spoke about it now. The person had been quiet and respectful, helping when asked and disappearing when not. There were no problems, no conflicts. One day, the person simply stopped coming into town. No one reported it, because no one expected answers. That was how things worked there. Mara asked about the disappearance. Luis said there were guesses, but no proof of anything. Some thought the person moved on. Others believed the cave held secrets better left alone. He advised Mara to live quietly and let the land teach her. His eyes held concern, not fear. When he left, Mara felt both warned and welcomed. The town did not reject her, but it would not protect her either. Back at the cave, Mara read more carefully. She noticed entries that described specific places around the hills. Marks were drawn in the margins, simple symbols repeated again and again. They were not random. She followed one set of notes to a narrow passage behind the sleeping area. It was well hidden, blending into the stone. Inside, she found stored supplies, preserved carefully. The cave was more than a home. It was a system built for patience. Days passed, and Mara settled into a routine. She cleaned, cooked, and read. She repaired small cracks and improved airflow using the notes as guidance. The cave responded, staying cool and dry. At night, she wrote her own thoughts in a new notebook. She felt closer to herself there than she had in years. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt protective, like the writer intended. One afternoon, Mara noticed movement near the hillside trail. A figure passed at a distance, then vanished behind rocks. It could have been a hiker, or someone from town. Still, the sight stirred something uneasy. She remembered the entries about unfamiliar faces. She checked the cave entrance and stayed inside until sunset. Nothing else happened, but the feeling remained. The cave felt alert, as if reminding her to stay aware. That evening, Mara found a folded page tucked inside one of the oldest notebooks. It had been missed before because it was thin and pale. The writing was careful and firm. It spoke directly to whoever found it. The writer said the cave was chosen to protect something important, something that should not be owned but guarded. The message ended with advice to trust observation over noise. Mara closed the page slowly, realizing the cave was not just shelter. It was a responsibility passed quietly from one life to another. Mara woke before sunrise with a strong sense that the cave had changed. The air felt sharper, and the quiet felt more focused than before. She sat up and listened, letting her breath slow. Nothing moved, yet everything felt awake. She remembered the message about guarding something important and wondered what that truly meant. The cave walls held the cool of night, steady and patient. She felt like a guest and a keeper at the same time. That mix of feelings stayed with her as she began the day. She decided to follow the symbols marked in the notebooks. They pointed toward the higher ridge beyond the cave, a place she had not explored yet. The trail was narrow and uneven, shaped by time rather than feet. As she climbed, she noticed small signs that someone had walked there before her. Stones had been shifted carefully, not randomly. The writer had traveled this path many times. Mara felt guided, even though she was alone. The land felt quiet but watchful, like it was testing her patience. At the top of the ridge, she found a shallow opening hidden behind brush. It was not large enough to live in, but it was deep enough to store something. Inside, she discovered a sealed container wrapped in cloth and wax. It was heavy for its size. She did not open it right away. Instead, she sat outside and looked across the desert. The view stretched far, revealing how exposed the land truly was. She understood then why someone would choose stone and silence over open ground. Back at the cave, Mara opened the container carefully. Inside were old maps, hand-drawn and marked with routes and notes. They showed water paths beneath the land and safe places during storms. The writer had studied the area deeply, learning patterns most people ignored. There were also letters addressed to no one in particular. They spoke about protecting balance and avoiding attention. The words were calm but firm, written by someone who believed patience mattered more than force. As days passed, Mara noticed small changes around the cave. At night, distant lights appeared briefly on the horizon, then vanished. During the day, she heard engines far away, never close enough to see. She remembered the entries about unfamiliar faces and stayed alert. She limited her trips to town and spoke less than before. The locals did not question her silence. They seemed to understand it. The cave felt safer when she respected its quiet rules. One afternoon, Luis visited the cave. He stopped at a respectful distance and waited for her to notice him. He said he had been thinking about the old resident and felt it was right to check on Mara. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched the hillside. He asked if she had found anything unusual. Mara chose her words carefully and said the cave held history. Luis nodded as if that was enough. Before leaving, he told her that some places survived by staying unnoticed. That night, Mara dreamed of the writer. There was no face, only a presence that moved calmly through stone corridors. The dream felt less like memory and more like instruction. When she woke, she knew what she had to do. The cave was not meant to reveal everything at once. It was meant to be lived in slowly, respected daily. She began adjusting her routine, following the patterns described in the notebooks. The cave responded with comfort and stability. Weeks passed, and Mara felt herself change. She became more patient, more observant. The noise of her old life felt distant and unimportant. She repaired paths, protected stored supplies, and learned the land's signals. The cave no longer felt borrowed. It felt shared across time. She understood that the writer had not vanished without reason. The life had been passed quietly, like a message meant only for those willing to listen. And Mara was listening. Mara sensed the shift before she saw any sign of it. The mornings grew quieter in a way that felt different from peace. The wind moved less, and even the birds avoided the ridge above the cave. She remembered a line from the notebooks that spoke about silence as a signal rather than comfort. That idea stayed with her as she walked the familiar paths. The land felt like it was waiting. Mara trusted that feeling and slowed her steps, choosing observation over action. One afternoon, she noticed fresh marks near the lower trail. Stones that had been placed carefully were now disturbed. They were not broken, just moved slightly, as if someone had stepped where they were not meant to. Mara followed the trail with care, keeping distance from open ground. She did not feel panic, only focus. The notebooks had prepared her for this kind of moment. They taught her that attention was the strongest form of protection. That night, distant sounds carried through the hills. Engines moved slowly, stopping and starting far away. No lights reached the cave, but the presence was clear enough. Mara stayed inside and adjusted the entrance the way the writer had shown in sketches. Stone and shadow worked together, hiding signs of life. The cave became still again, holding her quietly. In that silence, Mara felt calm, not trapped. She understood now why the cave had been chosen. The next day, she went into town for supplies. The diner felt heavier than before, conversations shorter and quieter. Luis met her eyes and gave a small nod. No words were exchanged, but understanding passed between them. The town had noticed the changes too. People here had learned long ago that some moments required distance rather than curiosity. Mara finished quickly and left without drawing attention. The road back to the cave felt longer than usual. When she returned, she found a small object placed near the entrance. It was a simple stone marker, one she recognized from the maps. It meant watch and wait. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with responsibility. Someone else knew about the cave, or at least suspected its importance. Mara moved the marker to its proper place and reinforced the entrance. She trusted the system that had protected the place for decades. That evening, Mara read the final notebooks again. She noticed details she had missed before. The writer spoke of moments when attention grew too close, when it was time to step back and let the land do its work. There were references to patience outlasting pressure. The writer believed that what was guarded did not belong to one person or one time. It belonged to balance itself. Mara felt aligned with that purpose, steady in her role. Days passed slowly. The distant presence came and went but never approached. The land shifted subtly, offering cover and confusion to anyone who did not understand it. Mara stayed observant and calm. She wrote in her own notebook, recording changes and patterns. The cave felt alive with memory and intention. She no longer felt like she was living someone else's life. She was continuing it. One morning, after a long quiet night, the hills returned to their usual rhythm. Birds returned, and the wind moved freely again. The tension eased without explanation. Mara did not question it. She trusted the process that had worked before. Standing at the entrance, she felt grounded and certain. The cave had chosen her as much as she had chosen it. And she was ready to protect what came next. Mara woke with the soft light of morning reaching deep into the cave. The air felt lighter than it had in weeks, as if the land itself had released a held breath. She sat quietly and listened to the familiar sounds returning, the distant wind and the small movements of life outside. The tension that once shaped her days had eased without announcement. She understood that the land did not explain itself. It only responded. That understanding brought her a sense of calm she had never known before. She stepped outside and watched the sun rise over the hills. The desert looked unchanged, yet she knew it was never truly the same from one day to the next. She remembered her life before the cave, the constant movement and noise, the feeling of being pulled in too many directions. Here, everything had purpose, even stillness. She felt grounded, as if her feet finally belonged where they stood. The cave was no longer just shelter. It was part of her rhythm. Mara spent the morning tending to the paths and markers around the cave. She adjusted stones that had shifted and refreshed signs meant only for those who understood them. Each action felt natural, guided by memory that was not entirely her own. She realized she no longer needed to read the notebooks as often. Their lessons lived in her now. The writer's voice had faded into quiet understanding. What remained was responsibility shaped by care rather than fear. Later that day, Luis visited again, bringing supplies without explanation. He placed them near the entrance and sat on a nearby rock. They spoke little, but their silence was comfortable. He told her the town felt calm again and that whatever had stirred before had moved on. He did not ask questions, and Mara did not offer answers. Trust existed in what was not said. When he left, he wished her peace, and she believed he meant it deeply. As seasons shifted, Mara settled fully into her life within the stone. She improved water collection and reinforced storage areas using knowledge passed down through writing and observation. She kept the cave simple and quiet, avoiding excess. The land rewarded her patience with stability. Storms passed without harm, and the cave remained steady. She felt connected to something older than ownership or time. Living there was no longer a choice. It was a commitment. One evening, Mara opened a new notebook and wrote a message meant for no one specific. She wrote about listening first and acting second. She wrote about how safety came from respect rather than control. She left guidance without instruction, trusting that the right person would understand when the time came. The act felt complete, like closing a circle. She placed the notebook carefully among the others and sealed it with care. Years passed quietly. Mara aged gently, shaped more by seasons than stress. The town changed slowly, as towns always did, but the cave remained constant. Sometimes travelers passed through the hills without noticing it at all. Sometimes someone paused and felt the cool air, then moved on without understanding why. The cave protected itself as much as Mara protected it. Balance was maintained through patience rather than effort. One day, while walking the ridge, Mara saw a young woman standing far below, looking toward the hillside with curiosity. The sight stirred something familiar. Mara did not approach. She watched and waited. The woman eventually turned away, but the moment stayed with Mara. She understood then that her role was not to decide who came next. It was to keep the place ready, quiet, and true. That was enough. As the sun set that evening, Mara stood at the entrance of the cave and felt content. She had not found wealth or fame or answers meant for crowds. She had found belonging. The cave had changed her life not by giving her something new, but by revealing what she already carried. In the growing quiet, Mara smiled softly and stepped back into the stone, knowing the cave would endure, and so would its purpose.